Welcome to the Breakup Theory, conversations about ending things and collective liberation. On this episode, Caroline and I respond to a listener letter that really gets at the heart of the breakup experience. A fundamental question: how do you survive a devastating breakup, and how do you relate to yourself afterwards? We take the opportunity to look at this situation from all the angles. The main issue is coming to accept that you live with ghosts. And then we turn to a new segment where we discuss what we are currently breaking up with. Here we talk about the pressures of individualism, both in the sense of therapeutic advice and career or professional expectations, and then the question of joining things or letting yourself off the hook while the world is falling apart. There's a real pleasure in doing nothing. Thank you to everyone who shares their stories and lets us consider them. Please keep writing and calling us. As always, we have an online submission form at forum.jotform.com/thebreakuptheory/stories and a phone line at 917-426-6548. Can't wait to hear from you. And finally, you can support the project and my other work by subscribing at patreon.com/thebreakuptheory. If you have extra money, you can sign up for $5 a month, but nothing's paywalled. On the Patreon, I post short and long written pieces along with every episode of the Breakup Theory and other conversations I'm having. I'm really grateful for people supporting me in this project. I'm developing extra things for subscribers like real-time discussion sessions or reading groups. And you can also rate and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, share with your friends and exes. And now for our conversation. All right, so today we have a little session of letter response, and then it's me and Caroline here talking, and we will talk a little bit about what we're working on in our own internal life breakups. So we're going to start with this recent letter that we received, and then move on to each of us kind of talking about what we're working on. Caroline, will you read us the letter?
Yes, this is the letter. My first romantic relationship, which lasted about a year, recently ended. I know that I shouldn't locate my self-worth in a relationship, but I've felt completely destroyed over it and like I'm somehow worthless if I'm not coupled, even though I have a great network of care otherwise. Any advice?
So real. So
real. Yeah.
And also, River wasn't able to make it, but had this line: if it didn't destroy you, you weren't doing it right. And I was like, this is also very much the epitome of queer relationships as far as I'm concerned.
Shirley responded to River saying, spoken like a true queer.
Yeah.
If you don't feel totally dismantled and scattered, was it even worth it? Did it even happen? Which is not to say that I necessarily believe that, but it is a big part of being gay.
Yeah. I mean, it's typical of certain forms of queer love. I often sort of associate it with like lesbian longing and yearning and also like the kind of imbrication of lives that happens within lesbian relationships. But yeah, I mean, okay, not to be too flippant, but first I want to say that for me, thinking about relationships and breakups, and just like the drama that can happen with relationships, I do think that I receive some feeling of life through the difficulties and drama of relationships. And so going through a devastating breakup is super painful, and that sucks.
It's also enlivening for you.
Yeah, it's a important aspect of feeling as a person who has relationships. And also I mean, it will help you understand and think through things. But yeah, I think I guess to rephrase it, I'm thinking that we often feel like an end to things is just a problem and a disaster, even deaths, right? And we're scared of kind of going through the grieving process, but that itself is part of life, and learning how to end things and how to live through and survive the ending of things, and how to grieve people, whether they're just not in your life anymore, or they've died. That's something that's super important, and is a totally necessary part of understanding relationships.
Right. Yeah, we don't get out of that. We don't get out of that one. We can't opt out. And I'm so sorry to this listener that they feel so destroyed. I have been there, and it can feel really isolating. You can feel really fragmented. You can feel really far away from those care networks. you can feel really far away from the people who you know care for you and love you unconditionally. And the real meat or part of this writing that I want to talk about, and I want to hear what you think, Shuli, is this idea that like I shouldn't locate my self-worth in a relationship. I just think it's always really telling when we place a requirement on ourselves that maybe is contradicting how we feel at the moment, because the feeling is that this person feels worthless. They feel destroyed, completely destroyed. And yet they are also being oppositional with themselves and saying, I shouldn't locate my self worth in a relationship. And of course, I understand what they mean by that. Right. But I would also get really curious and kind of slow down and be with that feeling, that feeling of wanting to control or harness or lasso the feeling of loss. It is so hard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super sensitive to this. It's something I do to myself. Like, when I'm stuck in a feeling that feels bad, I will start beating myself up about how the feeling itself is wrong, you know,
Mhm.
which doesn't tend to help me move through it. And actually,
Right.
it'll like kind of distance you from the feeling often.
Right. Right. Well, and it can get you caught in a loop, like it can really snag you.
Right. And like, I mean, this is a thing that I've said that I wanted to practice for like maybe over a decade. It came to me from an acupuncturist I used to see, and she was like, you need to work on finishing your feelings,
Hmm.
like by which she meant like feeling them out, right? Like letting them be there. And so when you have a feeling and start making this judgment about whether it's right or wrong, you're not actually feeling the feeling. You're like moved on to some other place, which for me is
Yeah.
always more comfortable because I am like a thinky person. I'm like,
Mhm.
let me intellectualize this instead
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
dealing with
Let
the
me let me
pain.
think this. Yeah. I heard a friend once say that something that they were trying to do in their life was feeling fully or feeling completely rather than deeply, which reminds me of what you said, that rather than feeling the need to like put this emotion in some sort of like emotional hierarchy, you're there, like you're in that feeling. And sometimes you just have to feel destroyed for a little bit. Like I just don't know. I just like don't think there's a way out of that. And I do want to talk a little bit more pragmatically about some advice, because there are some when I read this, there were some concrete things that came to mind for me. And I think it makes sense to give yourself practical kind of like material intervention if something is putting you 1 million miles away from any sort of coastline. But if the person who wrote in is just kind of locating the entire problem in the feeling, it's like, yeah, like sometimes we just feel destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fact, right, that this relationship has ended.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
like that is something that will have kind of unpredictable resonance within your life. And I think like I think it's good to talk about advice, but also to like try to listen to yourself and what your needs are, because like grieving a relationship doesn't necessarily follow some kind of like pattern. I mean, we could talk, there's like stages of grief or whatever, but they're not linear necessarily. Like you'll have like, you could have a day where you're like, I don't want to do anyone or do anything or see anyone. Maybe you'll have a day also where you're like, I don't want to do anyone. But
Yeah.
you'll have different kinds of moods and feelings, right? And like, I don't know, like the self-worth thing is yeah, obviously it's a predominant quality of heteromonogamous
Mhm.
sort of norms, that like your standing in the world and the culture is related to your ability to like latch on to someone else, become a codependent unit, and
Yeah.
like develop a life with a certain pathway. And I mean, it's just not honestly how most people in this world exist. And it's way more normalized,
Meaning
obviously.
they're not coupled in that way. Like that's not how most people live. Is that
Yeah,
what you
most people don't live like, 75 years of marriage
Yeah,
or like
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
We're in a world where we've like allowed for more breakups to happen, and not to think of those, even though the norms still exist of like, eternal loving or whatever, that it's much more actually normalized for people to end things.
Yeah. Well, when you said that, I just thought about how thrilling it is for me when I can have a conversation with my loved ones, like including my partner, like my partner who is we are in a hierarchical relationship and like she's my person, but it's just thrilling to me when I can hear somebody talk about their relationships and allow for the possibility that nothing is guaranteed, in a way that
Yeah.
feels really loving, like not in a way that feels doubtful or pessimistic necessarily, but just in a way that allows for like things happen. Like the way that we are with one another changes. And the way that we are with ourselves changes too, So not only has this person had a major change in how they are with this other person, but how they are with themselves has changed too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons why I like always talking about breaking up and advocate for ending things isn't necessarily to say end every relationship, although I will go on the record and say that's never a bad idea. But it's that we can enter into our relationships without these kind of unquestioned expectations that they must last forever. And so then, like, because I'm not trying to make people feel bad too, like, if you're not doing whatever relationship anarchy or non-hierarchical polyamory, but just like,
Right.
just know that like whatever relationships we embark on will have their own timelines and own rhythms that we don't know and can't predict. And that's even like true for like people will break up and then rediscover each other, in another point because the timing was wrong or something
Yeah.
needed to happen.
Yeah, like Ben and J-Lo.
Oh yeah, right.
Can I share just like a couple things? Well, okay. I'm
Yeah.
going to back up even further. Surely, when you have felt completely destroyed by a breakup, what have you done that's helped?
Well, let me think. I mean, I've felt like I lost my mind over breakups before,
Yeah.
The first thing that I feel like I need to do is like rediscover myself outside of the relationship because, in close relationship with someone, you exist in a different way. And especially if you like share living space or just spend most of your time together, ending that means that you have to like rethink how you exist in the
Yeah.
world. And so I try to find my places of comfort in the ways that I care for myself in a way that I like and that makes me really happy. And another way of putting that is like instead of thinking that I can only get the feelings of love and comfort from this one person who is now not in my life anymore, I can provide some of that myself. And
Yeah.
actually, like the thing that I love about that relationship with that person is something that comes from within me and then is enacted through the relationship, but is not solely
Right.
dependent on this one person.
Right. Because you were there too. You were also in the relationship.
Right.
It wasn't
Yeah,
just,
you set the standard for care together.
yeah. Yeah. You all created something. If you're coupled, for example, that person used the word coupled. So two, and you're in a relationship, you've created a third space
Right.
and you're part of that. So you can kind of pull some things back. One of my most treasured times in my life this breakup was really devastating to me. I initiated it. We were together for 7 years. This person left, and I was living on my own in the home that we had together. And I had both our cats, and the internet got turned off because he had been paying for the internet, and I didn't get the internet back. And I bought new sheets for the bed and I put the bed in a different corner of the room and I laid on the floor a lot, like I just like fucking laid on the floor a ton and watched DVDs from the library. And this was about 3 months of my life before I had a roommate move in, but it was such a special time because the day that my ex left, I told my mother, I said, I feel like my part of my body has been taken off of me.
Right.
Like I felt like there was a part of me physically that had been torn off or, like serrated off of my
Right.
body. But
Yeah.
I just, for whatever reason, I had the space to really be in that feeling. And there were some rituals that helped bring me back, not even necessarily to myself, but just to like the reality at hand, you know?
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to get this person back. I wasn't trying to date other people, although it's okay if folks are, but for me, I really needed that time to like take up a ton of space in my own life.
Hmm.
That wasn't a luxurious or extravagant time. It was really, really simple.
Yeah.
It was really good for me.
Yeah. I think that's like probably shared experience for many people is that like the time after a breakup can often be like incredibly empowering or strengthening. There's a few things in what you said that I think I would pull out. Like one, like the giving in to certain emotions, which I don't know, I was like I had the word in my head of wallowing, like which is a
Mhm.
negative connotation, but I'm like after a breakup I will spike my grief
Yeah,
through specific like sensory experiences, whether that's like
I love that.
shared things,
Yeah.
videos or pictures or like smelling,
You'll,
remnants of,
you'll treat yourself to a little wallowing.
yeah. And like, I think that's part of like a process of like kind of, I don't know, like the way Freud talks about it in Mourning and Melancholia is that you have to do some kind of reality testing where you're like going through bit by bit all these places to tell yourself that it's not there anymore, right? And I think the feeling of that is important. And then, like I got this conception when you were talking about like being in the apartment, and I've had moments like that too, where a person that I was in a relationship with moved out and I stayed. It's different than when you move out, but when you stay in that place, then like this is actually a really good visualization for something that I came to understand after like mourning a specific relationship. Because I would feel like if like after a breakup that I knew was right, but was still hard. But things like memories or feelings would come up, even maybe years later, and I would not know how to respond to them. And my body or my mind would be like a sense of alarm, like I have to do something about this. This is like telling me something. And finally, I think I've said this before, maybe on this podcast, I don't know, that I realized that there wasn't anything, there was no action, right? But I was being haunted. And like I was a haunted house where this ghost of the person and the relationship will always exist. And
Yeah.
so then I do not have to react to the feeling in a negative way, even though it could be painful. But I don't have to like say, I need to do something to get rid of this or to answer this. It just exists in
Yeah.
me now. And so I live with ghosts and I have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come to peace with that.
Right. I love thinking about ghosts and hauntings, both literally and figuratively. And what if the house was allowed to be haunted?
Yeah.
You know, what if not everything had to be an emergency or an exorcism? And I'm thinking again about this person saying, like, I felt like pulled all my self worth from being coupled. And this person has also said they have a good network of care. And I wonder what it would be like to reach out to that network and say, who am I? According to you, like, according to you, my beloved, who am I?
Hmm.
What do you see in me? Like,
Right.
you might need some like auxiliary personhood right now, and your loved ones can provide that.
Oh, it's a deep need, right? To be recognized and witnessed and like affirmed by people. And often when we are like coupled specifically, we tie all of that need up in one person, which is
Mhm.
not good for anyone, right? Like it actually isn't good for the maintenance of a couple, I think, to be so imbricated with each other. But like we actually receive a lot of that from other people, whether it's like, you know, in all the different functions of our life. It can be simply like walking down the street, but like our closest people, your care network will reflect to you different pieces of yourself, and that's real. And so like that's a thing to do is like meet that need elsewhere, meet some of the needs that the relationship fulfilled for you elsewhere, and realize that the relationship wasn't the sole source of meeting those needs.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering to myself, like, do I ever come into contact with parts of myself that were more alive or present when I was in that relationship? And I think the answer is yes, but I just relate to it so differently. It's just like a different shape, and that's okay too.
Yeah, you
Like,
change.
yeah, like maybe there were things about my particular, like that third space with this person that I don't get back. And like, that's okay. I don't know, but I should also say that my kind of general philosophy or kind of stance on personhood is that, we like to say that we can really locate ourselves really clearly, but I just don't think that's necessarily always true. And I think kind of accepting that things are more in flux is really like generous and loving way to be with ourselves.
Yeah.
And so, maybe this person will lose some parts of them, and that's okay too, but
Yeah.
I hope that they can turn to the people that are still there and say, what do you love about me?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, but also what you're saying, I think to go back to like the grieving and mourning, like you can grieve a version of yourself that
Mhm.
existed in that relationship, which
Yeah.
I don't think is necessarily that different from other like ways of growing up, right? I mean,
Well,
I was like a sentimental, weepy little kid too. And I like, even as
yeah.
I was a child growing up, I would be like, oh, I'm sad. I remember like, I really like well, it came from my mom, but like reading the A.A. Milne, the Winnie the Pooh author's poetry
Mhm.
book, Now We Are Six. And then I was like, when I turned 7, I was like, I can't read this book anymore because I'm
Yeah.
7. It's not true anymore. But like, there's always all of these versions of yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you grieve those. Like, I think about it also place based. When I see a place that I've inhabited or frequented, haunted, I'll be
Mhm.
like, there's a version of me in this place
Yeah.
still that is there, and like I can think about it and reflect on it. So, and I think actually the end of relationships whatever kind is a huge moment of transformation because you are freeing yourself from having to play the role that maybe got cemented in that relationship and maybe wasn't right for you. Like
Yeah,
I've
that's
had major
beautiful.
transformations in my
Mhm.
life. Like, I mean, I had to end a relationship to live out my queerness, right? Like, and transition and stuff. And
Yeah.
I couldn't have done it before in that relationship. And I think that's like an important thing to allow the possibility for, even when you're right now feeling like destroyed.
Hmm.
But like, I was using this metaphor yesterday, and I think that maybe it's wrong, but like, the caterpillar goes into the cocoon to become the butterfly, but it's like becomes this like slurry of
It's
whatever.
disgusting. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like a sludge.
yeah. It
Yeah.
totally destroys itself to become
Yeah.
something else. I
Right.
mean, that's sort of cheesy, but like, yeah, destroying yourself allows for. I mean, this is an anarchist thing, right? Like, we aren't just talking about destruction because destruction clears the way to build something.
Right. And it's not just like destruction for destruction's sake, right? Like there's a process and there's an investment in what else there could be. So I hope that the person who wrote in can think about that. Like what else could there be? If we're using, if we're using the classic like another world is possible, that applies to us too. Like another you is also possible.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to say is like just kind of on a very basic level is, only this person can determine this for themselves, but sometimes we feel utterly destroyed in a way where we need more. And if this person is just finding like the way that I lived before this breakup or before I felt shattered is gone from me, like then you might want to talk to someone. It doesn't have to be a therapist, but you might want to reach out to a healer of some kind or let friends know like, hey, just so you know, like I'm really having a hard time eating. Like I'm
Yeah.
not cooking for myself. Okay, maybe now's the time to get some really good like microwavable meals. Find ways to kind of cobble that back together for yourself because I don't want to bypass the possibility that this person's feeling of destruction is, could also be impactful in those ways too, because that does happen.
It could be a good time also to like rediscover or find your witchiness or your spirituality. Like, I definitely in these transitional moments will like be like consulting tarot or something, to
Oh,
like
sure. Yeah.
hear myself and like what's happening through me in that moment and understand it coming from somewhere else, from
Yeah.
out from the cards. Like things like
Yeah.
that, like, and having rituals. I don't know, these could be important ways to like mark your possibility of transformation and welcoming in other things if you're
Yeah.
prone to that stuff. I don't know, I think I get wooier in
Mhm.
breakups than I am
Yeah.
in daily life normally.
Yeah, that makes me think about, I don't think that's uncommon for a lot of people, and how much of that is our desire to be with someone or like with something in a loss. If I think of what I'm consulting or my ritual as like another entity, then
Yeah,
I'm not as alone, right?
it goes back to the ghost thing too, like because also you can like sort of try to channel the spirit of like what you lost in the relationship and understand something from that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm pushing that too much, but there's another thing that I think has to be talked about, right? Because it's
Okay.
like the person says I'm somehow worthless if I'm not coupled, and obviously a common reaction to ending a relationship is looking for other people, right? A
Mhm.
lot of us do that, and I think like it's very understandable, right? You might be like, oh, I'm gonna like go out, put myself out, like get on the apps or whatever. And I think that there's a place for that. It can be helpful. It can tell you things to relate to other people, see like what you like and don't like in terms of relationships and how you engage with people. It can also feel bad in,
Yeah.
in
It
various
also picks
ways.
you up.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to make a moral judgment about doing that because I've done that and I've not done that. I've like intentionally
Yep,
been
me
like
too.
I'm not going to date, and then I've intentionally been like I want to
I'm gonna date
try,
so much.
or also just yeah, be like a
I'm gonna
total
fuck so many
slut.
people. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
some slutitude.
Yeah.
So I just think I don't know. I think you like try to investigate like what you're looking for in whatever you're doing, whether it's like being alone or and with friends and not seeking out sexual or romantic connection, or if you are seeking that out again, because like think if it is like I'm looking for my worth or like trying to show the world that I'm worthy because other people like me in the sexual romantic way. I don't know. I think it's good to just be honest with yourself about what your intentions are. And also, it's like good to be explicit to people that you're relating to what you're looking for because it can help protect everyone a little bit in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I just thought about what it would be like to have some sort of kink scene, where you negotiate up front, like, I want to play with this idea of worth, like have somebody like, like really make me feel so seen and worthy and like, in almost this play way. But that's,
It could be fun to, yeah, I mean, to enact something that answers your current feelings and needs. Actually, that made me think of another thing, which is separate from the kink scene that you're proposing, but like the worth stuff. Like, I know a lot of people, when they break up, think that they must have some kind of closure with the person that they're
I'm
breaking up
glad you
with,
brought that
and
up.
like
Yeah.
expect that from someone. And I just don't think that you should demand that of another person.
Right. I agree.
I don't think it's possible to necessarily get through another person. Like, they're not going to give that to you by themselves. And you have to be part of it, whether you decide to engage in some kind of like ending things with the person intentionally, but also like it's really up to you to like to make the meaning out of this things. But that's like, again, like letting yourself off the hook, and that's finding your and letting the other person off the hook too, and finding your whatever your worth in something that you make rather than what you receive from this person who you have to grieve now.
Yeah. I think that's beautifully put. And I hope this person feels different soon
Yeah. I mean, like,
or not soon. I don't know.
yeah,
Maybe.
enjoy the time
Yeah.
perhaps in a perverse way if you can, like, because it's a moment, it's a part of like living, and you'll get out of it, and then you'll feel light and free, and then you'll get in another relationship, and then like it's just like it's important to remember that whenever you get into relationships, you're risking something, you're risking this pain, and this pain now, like this, you said it was your first serious relationship. This is the pain that you are like wagering in a
Hmm.
relationship, and it will happen one way or another. Right? So but now you know it, and now you can survive it, and now you like learn more about how to act in relationship around these feelings.
Well, shall we take a quick break before we get to the next part of
Sure.
our talk today? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we are back. And now we are going to have our first session of What Are You Breaking Up With? Where we talk about the identities, concepts, feelings, institutions, habits. I don't know what else. What are other things somebody could break up with?
Stories.
People, places, things, stories, beliefs, narratives. Yeah. This is not something that I've done. I'm not talking post breakup. I'm really just in a lot of consideration for this. And I've talked to a lot of other people who have my job who feel similarly. And it strikes me that this actually feels pretty difficult to do and sometimes to name. And so what I'm thinking about is I work, in like a dyadic therapy. So I work one on one with people, and sometimes I work with couples. And while I bring in and my patients bring in the world to the session, like it's not like nothing exists in a vacuum. I really want to better break up with this tradition or kind of like model or way of thinking about change that is always about the individual. It just feels so fucking hard. And I have done this work for a long time. I've, done this work for over a decade, and I've worked in the mental health field for over a decade, and it just feels so hard to get out from under this like boulder that is how to actually physically talk to people about what they are experiencing, and then come to the place when it's like, okay, what happens after this? Right? Like, how does this shift? How does this change? And know that we are talking about like structures of power that are outside of them individually, but it seems like the only way to talk about things changing is individual change.
Mm-hmm.
It just is so frustrating. And I'm so, I can even name with my clients that it's frustrating. Like I can even say like, yeah, this is frustrating because how do you take this into a larger picture? But when it comes down to, I don't know, it just feels like I just feel so limited in how to actually effectively have even just like intervening dyadic conversations with people that isn't just solely like, well, are you doing this yourself alone by yourself within your own psychic world? Like it just feels so limiting.
Yeah. That's something I've struggled with as like on the other side of the
Mm,
couch, or
yeah, 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 yeah.
both in terms of like seeing therapists and also being like a patient as for health, for body, physical health,
Hmm.
that there's this feeling in relationship often with the practitioner of it being like all on me, my responsibility, my fault, right? I don't
Hmm.
know. I'll separate them a little bit, like with like I have a chronic illness, and I feel like I've always struggled with how much of like having a flare is related to my behaviors, and I've been treated
Yeah.
by doctors as if when I've
Yep.
had a flare that there was something I did wrong, and then
Yeah.
as I've like sought help for that and support, a lot of the like books that tell you their cures basically act as if it's completely under your control, and I don't think that that's true.
Yeah. You haven't tried an elimination diet?
I have. I've tried all the diets and I've gotten all the books and they all contradict each other. So it's like, and we all have different bodies. I
I
mean,
just
that's the
hate
true
elimination
individualism
diet
is that
stuff. Yeah.
the true individualism is that we can't have a cure all, right? That is equally applicable, but the books profit off of like kind of shaming you into it. And I think the same thing has been true for me in terms of therapy that like I've studied psychoanalysis and I've been in therapy in large periods of my life. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I can like really understand where my problems come from. I can totally talk about it and think about it. But in the end of the day, it's like I'm still doing the thing.
Yeah.
And like the
Yeah.
understanding and talking about it doesn't get me to the like other side that I think I'm looking for at least is like to like stop the painful ways that I relate to myself or like whatever the neuroses, whatever you want to call them. I've never been able to get past the naming or
Hmm.
explaining them. And
Hmm.
so that feels like it is really like in the end it's like just looped back into like me and being stuck in my head.
Yeah.
That's a little different though, like I don't know, like that's like the experience, but like then when we think about it in terms of how it shows up in like popular culture, especially like the way it's become such a big part of like social media presence, the kind of self-help gurus and therapy gurus, it
Yeah.
becomes a hyper individualistic thing, and it's like totally connected to the fact that like in this world where there's no more kind of secure jobs that are long
Right.
term, that we're all entrepreneurs too, right? Like
Right. Yeah. Oh my God. What a good point. Yeah. I was just, it's something that kind of frustrates me. And maybe I've even said on this podcast is this like idea that like everyone needs to be in therapy, like just be in therapy. And it's like, no, some people just actually like fucking need groceries,
right,
like actually. And I will say that kind of the things I'm circling on as a clinician and not as a patient, which I also am, is how, maybe the thing I'm breaking up with as we're talking about it is the thing that maybe the thing I would like more so to break up with is just the fantasy that this job or this task is like bigger than what it is. Like
mm,
it could just be that I sit with someone and it's like zone where there's no kind of like multitasking or doing other shit and I'm just listening, and that in and of itself is supportive for the person who comes to me every week, right? Like,
right. And some of the
I,
place that we were talking about earlier, like you're reflected to yourself through this relationship, and it's a very particular kind of relationship, although like Freud would say too that it's like necessarily paid for, right? It's like transactional because
of course.
there's a difference
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
like doing this with your friends versus doing this with a professional.
Yes. Yeah. And I do understand that. And I have a healthy respect for it. And when people ask me about it being a job, I'm really clear that like it's a skill set, and the way that I talk to people is not necessarily the way I'm going to talk to a friend. I mean, it really isn't. It
Right.
certainly is not, and for good reason. But if I'm talking with somebody about how painful a life circumstance is, and we can agree that like there's other shit at play, it just feels so. I just still feel like when they leave the room, I'm like, good fucking luck. Like it just like I feel such. I don't know. I feel so. I don't always feel this way, but it just is. It's just hard. It's just
Yeah.
hard. And really, I think the bone I'm trying to pick is like the training programs and the modalities and all of that shit, like the ones that I've really based a lot of the way I work on, do take into account like systems of power,
Right.
but it's like, okay, so that you're just teaching me like how to have a conversation with somebody about systems of power. So that's what I'm kind of getting back to, right? Is like maybe I'm just picking at the wrong open wound, like
Is it
maybe
your
this is
moral
not
failing or is it capitalism?
right. Right. Like maybe I'm just kind of perpetuating it, right? Like this is my own enactment. Like why can't I do better?
Yeah, well, right. I mean, I don't, yeah, I didn't hear you limiting your like ability to practice on this, but actually like trying to delimit the kind of scope of the field. And,
Yeah.
there's like a perspective on it that says, psychology and psychiatry are kind of bourgeois science invented in the 19th
Mhm.
century that have tended to be used to like reaffirm power systems, like,
Yeah.
the birth of psychoanalysis out of hysteria and the control of women's bodies and pleasures and stuff like that. Although these fields have also given us a lot of insight into the effects of power and the structuring of people's
Right.
psyches, they've been, institutionalized, and that institutionalization has been used for power. And then also that these are professionalized, which means that they're accessed through needing resources,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then most of the people do assume that the problems are individual problems that are like based on infantile traumas or whatever, and not necessarily socially located. Like I was just told you, I'm translating a French book on the political history of psychoanalysis, and they were talking about how like Wilhelm Reich was like, oh my God, like how can we not be taking into consideration
Mhm.
like social economic conditions when people are complaining about like mental health problems? So that's like it's been a long standing problem with the field, and like we could imagine, right, in a world without this kind of structure, that there would be other forms of like community based care that we would practice, and that we actually do practice these in various ways in our relationships with people. Like you have the people you talk to. Like I know sometimes what I need is like to be able to talk to someone who will listen to me without giving me advice, right? Which is sort of what a therapist does
Right.
to like help you collect yourself, and then I can ask for that, right? So like the professionalization could be criticized, and we could also criticize, like I think you were saying, that to some extent you're complicit within the system, and to the extent that
Mhm.
you like use, I don't know, that you're just occupied, it's just occupying that position, right, in a way. But on the other hand, like I don't know, like this is how I relate to my role in academia, which is, is precarious, but I'm like I do not identify with the institution. I
Mhm.
like do what I can within that position to connect with people, to spread resources, to study forms of liberation together. But I don't think that I'm like wielding the power of the institution for good through my position. And
Right. Right.
so through
Right.
your
Right.
position, you have access to people in a very particular way. And you're not going to turn those into like friendships, because that would probably be inappropriate. But you can kind of go into it intentionally through that. And I do think it's rare for a lot of therapists to bring in social
Mhm.
situations and even maybe be critical of the system itself. Like you could
Yeah.
do that with your clients.
Yeah, as we're talking about it, I really do feel like I've kind of honed in more on what it is, which is it's this own kind of like micro enactment, right? Of me saying to myself, like, you're not doing it right, because I like it's a skill set, which means it's a job, So like, am I working within the structure or containment of the job? Like, yes, like I mean, I am talking with people about yes, this job, this is what social workers have done historically and do today. Like this is what it means for me to be in a gatekeeping position over like writing letters for like gender affirming surgeries, like this is what it means. This is what it means for me to know a lot about your life, but you not know a lot about my life. Like what like I'll have those conversations with folks, and I can't imagine not having those conversations, but it does occur to me that maybe I'm just like asking kind of myself, like, it's like the wrong question. It's like I'm like going in through the wrong door, And maybe the thing I'm actually more so struggling with is just like wanting to have like a better relationship to wanting things to feel different. And maybe there is this limitation to how different they can feel in this particular aspect of my life.
Right. I mean, I think this is actually one of the sort of parts of the most insidious parts of capitalism, neoliberalism, is that we look to our job for the sense of meaning. And in particular, we have now, I think, kind of equated the possibility of like social justice and mutual aid or whatever through like finding like that we can enact these things through jobs, which
Yeah.
like
Right.
structurally these jobs do not allow for. And in
Right.
fact, they will end up reaffirming those divisions, which is like, the nonprofit complex is like the perfect example of this, that it exists not actually to make things better, but to maintain status quo through the image of making things better.
Right.
So like I think, I don't know, yeah, like we do this in lots of different jobs, that like I'm doing this because I want to like bring together my desire to change the world for the better and that my need to work to survive.
Yeah.
And I think I think it's just important to be honest. And then also like this moment, right? Like I would imagine being a therapist in this moment, I mean, everything's getting worse all the time. We're like 8 months of just like totally vicious genocidal violence.
Yeah.
Like it's and the power structure insisting that it's not happening. Like
Yeah.
it's and then we have to continue to work,
Right.
and like
Right.
the
Right.
climate catastrophes and the looming election, which either way is going to be bad. Like
Yeah.
it's terrifying, and the ongoing pandemic, right? Like I mean, that has totally deteriorated my mental health and my ability to like live in the world. So like it's just like there's no, I don't know what we can actually even do. We're super limited
We
in
are so
individual
super
relationships.
limited. Yeah, we are so super limited. And yeah, I mean, maybe I haven't even taken into account the fact that, especially over the last 8 months, like the kind of suffering that I'm like talking about for like 6 hours a day, is just like, yeah, it's just like radically shifted, and
Yeah, my I saw my psychiatrist yesterday, who is like sort of the things that are going on in your life. Like for me, it's mostly my real insecure job situation, and that I'm
yeah,
like I don't know what's going to happen to me like 1 month in advance. Constantly looking for work is so destabilizing that no wonder it's like not going to be cured by a pill, right? Like I'm not going to take an SSRI and then not be, and then
hmm
like that'll solve my job problem, you know?
right. Yeah. So I really am glad that we talked about this because I do think that I'm making the connection that like I'm maybe just kind of internalizing some of those things that come up in the sessions all the time, like yeah, just like sitting with the folks I have seen for years and just us both like crying in session, because we're like, yeah, just like both saw the same horrific, picture of a dead child. Like it's like, well, what the fuck else, right?
And some people don't have places because like the sort of status quo is so violently imposing itself. Some people don't have places to put that, right? Like if they're,
Mhm.
like if you're surrounded by Zionists and you don't have
Right.
relationships with other people, for example, or like, I don't know, like you can't talk about it at work because you've seen the repercussions that happen, or
Yeah.
I was going in and teaching like every day for the last year, and I would like start every class being like, I'm only thinking about this, like do you all want to talk about it? And then my students would like most of the time be like, nah, not interested, like
Yeah. Yeah. That was a really, yeah, that particularly for me, yeah, that was wild. How is not every single person I'm in contact with every day like not waking up thinking about Gaza?
well, the push for normalcy is so strong. Like we see that in the willingness for everyone to give up masking,
Yeah.
and I guess that's the thing you can take into your practice too, is that like typically historically psychiatry, psychology have been forces of normalization to try to get people to change themselves to fit the expected roles and structures of like, cis hetero working life, and
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to impose those norms on people, but actually can
Yeah.
reflect on the failure of those norms to actually fulfill our lives.
Right. Right. Yeah. And yeah, I'm just having this experience right now where I'm listening to that and I'm also holding that I feel like a little self-conscious about it. And I want to be clear, it's like not like a judgment on the people who like didn't wake up every single day thinking about Gaza. It's like I actually understand like why you wouldn't.
Right.
Like that
Yeah.
makes sense, like duh, like a fucking course. But I definitely have been having a lot of fantasies lately about I'm like, what would I do if I wasn't a psychotherapist? And
Yeah. I keep imagining what I could do too.
yeah, what would you do?
I mean, my dream would be to like write much of the day,
Yeah.
and probably it's funny because I'm living in New York.
hmm
I've left my rural life, but I imagine always like being outside and having a garden, and then like
You
eating
used
and
to have a
talking with
garden,
people.
right?
Not here in New York. I don't
I
have any
know,
garden.
no, no, but in
I've
where?
had gardens
Yeah, yeah,
in most of the places I've lived at weren't New York
yeah,
before,
yeah,
but no, yeah, just like and then yeah, being with people and eating and making food and talking. Those are the things I would like to do, but they're not the things that are available to me as like, I mean, they are available to me, and I work to make them available to me, and I take the cuts that come with that, which means that I'm not working in some successful job. Not that that would even be accessible to me either, but like the
Sure, sure.
I don't know. Well, I mean, okay, so with just a few more minutes, I might just bring up my thing because I think it's
Yeah.
connected to me in this way. The thing I've been struggling with personally is like my conflicted or my ambivalence, let's say to use a Freudian term, around joining things because this is another moment
Joining
of
is also it's also an analytic term, but I know.
joining. I mean,
Yeah. So
joining
I
groups of being part of
yeah.
things, and my like sort of innate sense of separation or alienation or isolation. So like because this is a moment of like many different kinds of mobilization because of the terror that we're witnessing, I've been, brought into these places of organizing, and I've had some harmful, hurtful experiences that have like driven me out. And I've had places where I'm just like, oh, this isn't for me. Like this is something else. People are doing something. It's cool what they want to do. I've tried to bring up my perspective and people are like not as interested, and I can still contribute in some ways, but I'm like don't foresee myself fully giving myself to it.
Mm.
And it's also similar because I'm like, recently moved here and I'm trying to find community and be like, who do I want to spend my time with? Like all these things are connected to me, and I feel torn by an ambivalence about the desire to be with people and do things together, and also that I think often and ultimately like to be alone.
Mhm.
and then I guess also getting older. This is what my therapist has been talking to me about is
Yeah.
redefining for myself like what I am, what I offer, what I want to do, not based on old expectations of myself when I was younger, but to be like
Yeah.
now this state of my life, what is my contribution to the things that matter to me? It might be different
Right.
than what I used to think.
Right. Things have necessarily changed.
Yeah, in various ways, like his like contextually, politically, and then also internally to me and in the last few years, and they're like horrors for like
Yeah.
that collectively an experience. And yeah, I'm just struggling with it, and I beat myself up about my whatever obstacles I throw in my way of like joining things because I'm like I should want that, and then when I'm alone I'm like I wish I was like with people doing a thing,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know what to do with it. It's just something I'm thinking about, and I guess I'm like I kept saying to myself and to some friends I'm not a joiner,
Yeah.
and then I'm like well is that true? I don't know.
I don't know if I am either. Maybe yeah, I'm just thinking about like, and this is not, I know, I understand probably this is not where you were going, but I was just thinking about kind of the intrusive nature of those thoughts, and how like sometimes we just have to be like, that means nothing. Like that thought about myself, like doesn't fucking mean anything.
Right.
It's just like on a fucking tape player.
Right. Like I try to take away the weight of each decision so that I'm not like, oh, my not doing this thing is now an eternal statement on my willingness to like be part of community. But like actually it's just a statement of my like energy levels and social levels right now.
Yeah, it's a statement on what you actually can and cannot do, and I don't know. I was just thinking about how I know that there's a lot of ways to like both like lovingly and like punishingly kind of criticize this idea of like what our capacity is, and like also like you have fucking limitations. Like there are things you can't do.
Right.
Uh,
And this is something I owe, it's my internalized ableism that
yeah,
because I've never actually allowed myself to like remember that I'm a chronically ill person, like, and that
yeah,
has, but I just to connect this back, one of the things that I've been reactive to in like movement spaces has been this thing that where they're just calling for bodies. They're like, we need bodies at this thing. Let's throw bodies at this problem. And like specifically often, let's throw bodies towards arrest. And
yeah,
I really like rebel against that idea. And it makes me think like going back to your question about, practicing therapy and the individualization of it, like there's this kind of idea that leftism that develops out of a kind of Marxism that like it's really the social conditions are the most important thing, and the individual is kind of just a product of that. And that's
right.
not satisfying for most people. It's what has been used as a kind of anti-communist propaganda by the capitalists. But actually, anarchism for me is the thing that tries to think about how do we retain individual autonomy in collectivity with like mutual responsibilities and the ability to follow our own passions. And so like I also try to think about it in my politics. Like I'm not going to do a thing where I'm simply a body and part of the masses, because I don't actually believe that the masses are redeeming us. But that,
Yeah.
and I think that might be true too, to think about like within your role, like how do you navigate both of those things
Yeah.
of you need to have some worth in yourself and value for yourself. You're not just serving, and you also are determined by the circumstances that surround you in various ways.
Right. Yeah. I think it's cool that you're not joining things.
I mean, I also am.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing I was gonna say to you earlier was like actually you are doing like you are joining things, like lately I've been like, yeah, like when we even talking about scheduling, it's like you are joining things. So,
I have no realistic sense of what I'm actually doing at any time. I only think that I'm like totally horribly lazy and unproductive.
right. I know. I think that you and I have a pretty kind of a similar, gosh, what's the word? It's like a default, like, kind of like our system kind of defaults to this idea that like we're not doing enough or like we're not good enough. And I've just really tried to reconceptualize that as just like a glitch.
Mm-hmm.
It's like not a like conscious, like awake, like informed, like thorough, like loving or like lived experience way of knowing who I am. Like it's just a fucking glitch. Like it's just a glitch and you are joining things. And I would say that if you're having resistance to joining something, you get to be in that for a minute.
Yeah.
Like yes, you have had really awful experiences after joining things.
Right. I mean, the breakup theory idea is for me also about trying to trust those things, and you don't have to be everywhere all the time. And you don't have to be doing everything that everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
That's hard sometimes to understand because we're loaded with all these expectations, which like that, yeah, that glitch that you said, which just like it can rob us of the pleasure of doing nothing, which
Yeah.
is ultimately the goal of everything.
I really love doing nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, should we end there?
Yeah.
Let's
I love
finish doing stuff.
yeah. I have to go do something now.
Oh no. All right.
Well, I'm glad that we talked today, Shuli.
Yeah, thanks for doing this with me and talking through all the things. And we'll be back for another round soon. You've been listening to The Breakup Theory. Please write us at forum.jotform.com/thebreakuptheory/stories or call us at 917-426-6548 to share your breakup stories or ask for advice in anything you're dealing with. You can also subscribe at patreon.com/thebreakuptheory and rate and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you and see you next time.